The Legend of Zelda is one of the most well-known gaming franchises in the history of gaming. In its debut in 1986, The Legend of Zelda caused a stir in gaming and brought new and groundbreaking elements into video games, such as the freedom of exploration, the variety of different power-ups, aka items, and it was considered one of the best games of its time, and still is. But back then, Zelda brought something that would become a well-known staple in exploration gaming: dungeons. The Legend of Zelda was known for bringing about dungeons in games that served as places to test your strength, and usually they contained a prize at the end. In The Legend of Zelda's case, the original game's dungeons housed the Triforce of Wisdom, split into 8, and as the series continued on, it became apparent that the dungeons always held something of importance, be it precious gems, ancient artifacts, or even the tools that helped create the Master Sword. Most people didn't go through the dungeons to get the items at the end. Most people went through the dungeons because they were interesting, a challenge, and something to look forward to, and with every Zelda release, more dungeons are thrown into the mix, and that is what I will be looking at. I have researched and played through almost every dungeon I can, and I can now reveal what I think to be are the top 10 Legend of Zelda dungeons, be it for the puzzles, the use of a specific item, the boss, or the design. Everything about the dungeon will be taken into consideration, and with that, I will start this countdown. But first, I have 3 rules. 1. To make it a varied list, I am only allowing 2 dungeons per game, so Ocarina of Time will not be dominating this list. 2. To classify as dungeons, they must have an actual boss at the end and must be considered a main dungeon, so Beneath the Well from Ocarina of Time and the Hero's Cave from the Oracle games will not appear on this list, and no Wind Waker dungeons will appear here as I have actually not played the Wind Waker game. Sadly, it's quite sad, but hey. And note, due to the nature of this list, there can be spoilers, and there probably will be, so warning you guys, right now, I'm not going to be putting spoiler warnings in the list. I'm just saying there are going to be spoilers, and if you watch this list, you'll see spoilers. Anyways, let's begin the list, and I'll see you guys at number 10. At number 10, we have the Sand Temple from Spirit Tracks. Now, the Sand Temple is the 5th temple in the game, and its gimmick is, well, sand. Yeah, anyways, the Sand Temple itself is a multi-floored pyramid that consists of different puzzles related to, you guessed it, sand. Duh. But before we talk about the actual dungeon, I should mention that to get to the dungeon, you have to go through 3 trials. You have to kill a rock tektite, go through the Caves of Confusion or something like that, and then you have to take down cannons placed around the temple to get into the entrance. Now that's a lot of defenses for one temple. And why would you need so many defenses for this Sand Temple, why you ask? Well, the Sand Temple holds the Bow of Light, which shoots, you guessed it, light arrows. You know those arrows that KO everything in 1 or 2 hits? Yeah, those. Anyway, you enter the temple and are greeted with, you guessed it, more sand! The puzzles consisted of shifting blocks around to get where you wanted to go until you get the weapon of the temple, the Sand Wand. Now, the Sand Wand attempts, it makes, soft sand hard, basically. You can use the wand to move boulders and blocks into specific places, which makes for some puzzles that you actually need to think about, which is quite rare in the handheld Zelda games, as most of the puzzles usually have something next to it saying, hey, this is how you do the puzzle. And the Sand Wand is used effectively in the dungeon's boss, Skeldrich, where you have to shoot big balls at him after he tries to shoot you with big balls. The sand theme is prominent in the boss battle too, as without the Sand Wand and the sand, you would be screwed. So overall, a pretty cool dungeon with some excellent puzzles, a fun item despite not being able to use it outside of the dungeon for almost anything. Sounds a bit like Twilight Princess. And a great boss fight though. Who said the DS dungeon sucked? At number 9, we have the Ice Palace from A Link to the Past. To start off with, this dungeon is considered one of the hardest in the game, being the 9th dungeon that you have to go into in the game, and being the 5th dungeon of the Dark World. Now, you don't get many ice-themed dungeons in The Legend of Zelda, some of the dungeons coming to mind being the Ice Cavern mini-dungeon from Ocarina of Time, Snowhead Temple from Majora's Mask, and the Snowpeak Ruins from Twilight Princess, but this is considered the first ice-themed dungeon. To start off with, some of the enemies in this dungeon can only be killed with the fire rod, so if you run out of magic and you have no magic bottles, you're guaranteed to fail the dungeon. Also, the slippery ice floor makes for some tricky movement and can easily spell disaster. But if the dungeon is so hard, how come it's at number 9? Well, hard and best are two completely different things. Just because a dungeon is hard doesn't make it a bad dungeon. The Ice Palace is a prime example of this, bringing a variety of ice-themed puzzles, rooms with moving floors, and one of the best tunics in the game, the Blue Mail. The Blue Mail halves the damage you take and makes this dungeon a whole lot easier, and with a huge amount of floors, exploring is very encouraged here. And then there's the boss, Cold Stare, which is a living formation of ice and can only be defeated with the Fire Rod or the Bomb Boss Medallion. Luckily, magic refills fall from the ceiling with chunks of ice. But the battle is well done, and even getting to the boss is fun, having to explore every floor, find passages in the maze-like dungeon, and hope for the best. The only thing that keeps this dungeon so low on the list is that it doesn't actually have a specific item other than the Blue Mail. And although the Blue Mail is a great stat booster, there were no new toys to play with, so to speak, no new items. But the Ice Palace is still an amazing dungeon and my personal favourite from Link to the Past, and that puts it at the number 9 spot. So if you've noticed, the last two entries in my list came from 2D Zelda games, and we're going to be sticking with that theme. Will the final dungeon from the original Legend of Zelda appear? Actually, no. I'm not including any dungeons from the original Legend of Zelda on this list, because despite being a classic game, the dungeons were nothing to write home about. Dare I say it, some are considered, in my opinion, to actually be some of the worst dungeons in Zelda history. But enough of that, because my next dungeon is coming from the sequel, The Adventure of Link, and out of all of those dungeons, only one really comes to mind as an amazing dungeon, and that dungeon is the Great Palace, the final dungeon of The Adventure of Link. Now before you rage about my decision saying the Great Palace is better than the original final dungeon in Zelda, let me state my reasonings. Thank you. Now, the Great Palace was the finale and the black sheep of the series, and what a finale it was! The difficulty of this place was off the charts, and like the Ice Palace, that is one of the things I liked about the Great Palace. Now, in every sense, the Great Palace is a maze filled with the hardest enemies in the game. Sounds just like Mount Ragequit, aka Death Mountain from Adventure of Link, only much more badass. The Great Palace is the final test, and the resting place of the Triforce of Courage, and being the final test, it contains some... testing? Trials. No? Not funny at all? Shut up. Anyways, whether you go left or right from the entrance, there is a specific path you must take to reach the boss. Surprisingly, many of the passages are hidden, and with the average player will be missed, leading to frustration. That is, if you live long enough to get frustrated. You will rely on every single skill you have ever gotten in the game here, and boy is it worth it. The Great Palace, just getting to it requires a lot of skill, as you have to go through Death Valley. Yeah, I said it. Death freaking Valley. And you have to place the emphasis on death. You will die a lot. But this palace, it sounds not like a place of frustration, but a place where the true adventure of this game can shine. It is a place where exploration is necessary to continue, and exploration is the fundamental basic of Zelda. Now, before I go on to the bosses, you should note that the Great Palace is the only place in the Adventure of Link that actually has a save point. If you press continue, you can continue from the entrance of the Great Palace, not anywhere else in the entire game, which just shows how difficult the area is. Now, onto the bosses. The Thunderbird is an invulnerable bird you can only beat by casting the Thunder spell at the start of the battle. However, that drains away half of your magic meter, and if you enter the battle with less than half of your magic meter, it is impossible to win. Not only that, but if you cast the spell too early, it won't affect the Thunderbird, and you'll still be screwed. The Thunderbird is a true test, throwing fireballs left, right, and center to try and kill you, being a true boss of the Great Palace. But the reason why the Great Palace is so well known is probably because of the final battle with Dark Link, where you battle yourself for the Triforce of Courage. It is a battle worthy of the end of the game, until you do the crouch in a corner technique and win, that is. That is what puts this dungeon so down. The fact that the final boss can be glitched to win so easily, but the actual dungeon, having that grand feel, makes you feel ever so nervous as you enter that dungeon, and that is why I think the Great Palace is better than level 9. The only downside is that it still has the same music as every other dungeon, and I would have expected the last dungeon to at least have some sort of remixed theme of some sort. But otherwise, the Great Palace makes my number 8 spot. So we've looked at the harder dungeons and the forms of the last two entries, and we looked at the use of the items in the specific dungeons with the Sand Temple. So now we move on to something I look for in every dungeon in The Legend of Zelda. And this is a make or break moment for me. I look for atmosphere. I look for a dungeon that has a design that matches the feel, the music, and most importantly, how the player feels. Snowpeak Ruins from Twilight Princess is a prime example of this, and it is also my number 7 spot. Now, Snowpeak Ruins is the 5th dungeon in the Twilight Princess game, and when you first see the ruins you're reminded of something abandoned. Except when you enter, you meet the Yeti pair, 2 Yetis who live in the mansion alone and in love. The female Yeti, Yetta, original name I know, is ill, and throughout the dungeon you are constantly reminded that she is the only person that can get you into the bedroom where the mirror shard is that you have to collect. But the problem is, she lost the key, and you play errand boy going around the mansion trying to find it. Instead, for the first 2 places that she tells you to go to, you find ingredients for a soup, and then, only then will you find the key to get into the bedroom. But enough of that. First we have to discuss the actual dungeon. The design is that of a grand mansion that has been abandoned and is now covered in snow and ice, due to its location in the middle of the icy mountains. The only sources of warmth are usually where the Yetis live, in the front of the mansion, while the back rooms are inhabited by monsters that are out for your blood. Throughout this dungeon you are feeling alone, isolated, and pretty down as you maneuver through the icy levels. Unlike the ice cavern from Ocarina of Time, which was colourful and pretty, this place is barren and lonely, which sets the mood of Twilight Princess rather well. You are alone, with just Midna to keep you company. Now, onto the weapon you get. While not the best item in Twilight Princess, it is a very important one, being the ball and chain, which you can use to throw at all different kinds of enemies in order to kill them. That in itself is fun. I mean, you throw a giant ball around and hit people with your ball. But then you have the boss fight, Blizzetta, also known as Yetta. Yes, the Yeti that helps you throughout the dungeon, your one companion, is the boss. She is corrupted by the mirror shard and you are forced to battle in the bedroom, now frosted over and completely barren of any warmth or happiness. You use the ball and chain and reflections on the floor and your own instincts to defeat Blizzetta, and that's about it really. After the fight, you get the mirror shard, and Yetta and Yetto, the male Yeti, move on with their lives and love, leaving you alone once more. Perfect for the dark feel of Twilight Princess, and a very, very, very good dungeon. And that is why Snowpeak Ruins makes my number 7 spot. So, for our number 6 spot, we're going to be going to the final 2D dungeon on this list, and we're going to another odd game in the series. We are heading to Link's Awakening. Now, this is the 4th game in the franchise, and it confused most fans because it wasn't set in Hyrule. There was almost no mention of Zelda except at the very beginning of the game, and your goal was to wake the Windfish, a whale with a carpet on its back. Now, throughout the place where this game was set, in the island of Koholint, you had to face 8 nightmares. Some were guarded by the toughest of dungeons, like Turtle Rock. But Turtle Rock is not my decision because the boss completely lets that dungeon down. I've decided my number 6 is going to be from the Eagle's Tower, the 7th dungeon in the game. Now, the Eagle's Tower was a nightmare to get to, just like the Sand Temple from 10, because you had to complete many side quests in order to get a bird that would help you cross a gap to get the bird key, and only then could you unlock the entrance to the Eagle's Tower. The tower itself is one of the more unique dungeons in the entire series, though. The whole point of the dungeon is to break down 4 pillars holding the 4th floor up, and in doing so it will merge with the 3rd and 4th floor, creating a way to the boss. This is a gimmick that stapled itself into this dungeon as just one of the reasons why this dungeon worked. The music track in the background was eerie and mysterious with a sense of foreboding, which works very well because the mini-boss of this dungeon is the Grim Creeper, a play on the Grim Reaper, aka Death. And if that isn't morbid enough, do you really want me to destroy you, Nintendo fans? You had to kill Kirby. That's right, you had to kill the lovable pink ball Kirby. Morbid or what? But anyways, the item you get here is the Mirror Shield, but sadly outside of the dungeon the Mirror Shield is only needed once when you go through a tunnel with a flamethrower trap near the last dungeon. However, this is forgiven since this was before the Mirror Shield became the most well-known shield ever thanks to the Twin Rover battle in Ocarina of Time. Lastly, this dungeon's boss, the Evil Eagle, saw the return of the Grim Creeper on his mount, a giant vulture-like eagle, and it was a side-scrolling battle too. But unlike the Anglerfish battle, it was a really good one! This battle was noteworthy for me since I highly enjoyed the battle as a child, and I do now, but the annoying part was the Eagle would not kill you, only blow you off the platform and then pull a Moldorm, and start the fight all over again. But I love this dungeon too much to say anything truly bad about it, because it was actually quite confusing and it kept me trying to solve the puzzle for quite a while. And all of these dungeons are why I put Eagle's Tower at number 6. Agree with me? Well, I hope you do. And now we are going into the 3D Zelda games. We're getting into the serious temples and dungeons. But now, I'm going to throw a spanner in the works. You guys remember the water temple from Ocarina of Time? Who doesn't? Well, I'm not putting the water temple on this list. Just a second. Flame shield on! I need this flame shield because you guys are going to destroy me for this. I'm going to be putting the big brother of the water temple, the Great Bay Temple, on this list. Oh boy, I'm in for some flames today. That's why I put my shield up though. But you know what? It's my goddamn list, and this is my opinion, and I know that the majority of people hated the Great Bay Temple. Well, you know what? You guys need to give it a better chance. The Great Bay Temple from Majora's Mask is a great dungeon in a lot of the sense of the word great. Now let's go through a checklist of what it does right. It has tricky puzzles. Check. A gimmick not used in other dungeons in the same game. Check. A fun as hell mini-boss. Check. A fun and useful item. Check. A tough and challenging boss that didn't take a second to complete. Check. A track that actually fitted the temple. Check. Okay, let's go through those in more detail, shall we? The Great Bay Temple, like most other water temples in this series, relied on the different water-based puzzles to actually make up the temple. Changing the flow of the water from one direction to another, and making water spouts in the water was quite fun for me. I loved messing around with the water levels, trying to find new ways to get around, and the puzzles involving the ice arrows were also fun and interesting too. The gimmick was the changing of the water flow. People complained about how it was so tough to get the right flow changed, but that's because most people went a bit overboard and made it seem more complicated than it actually was. The temple was actually fairly linear in comparison to how people made it out to be, and I always had a clear view of where to go next, whenever I was in there. Maybe you guys didn't, but I felt it was very linear. The mini-boss Wart was a very fun boss, using bombs, hookshots, and other items to defeat him. And it was an ingenious way to make a fun mini-boss. However, on the flip side, Wart took a long time to actually kill and was a bit of a time waster, but was still a fun mini-boss. And after you beat Wart, you get the ice arrows. They turn the water and enemies to ice, and then you can use them as stepping stones. That is awesome, if not amazingly awesome. Enough said. Georg, the boss of the Majora's Mask Temple, Great Bay Temple thing, gets a lot of hate as a boss for being unforgiving, and I can see that, with his constant attacks of pounding into you as you are about to get back up, and the limited time to actually hit it while it's stunned. It reminds me a lot of Celosia from Shadow of the Colossus, being unforgiving if you mess up once, as you'll just get pounded and pounded until you die. But isn't that the fun part? Knowing you're not sure when the beast will be back, and that you need to act fast? It's fast-paced, and that's what a boss needs. Lastly, the music fit the temple perfectly. The track consisted of small beats and tiny melodies, which when put together, really shows the temple's actual gimmick and designs. There was a constant beat in the track, reminding you of the mechanical wheels and pipes, and there was a soft high melody, clear as water. Yeah, I did just say that, guys. And the main tune, which is both catchy and quiet, also like water. Yeah, a lot of water. The temple has everything good going for it, but the reason I put it so down low on the list is 1, I know a better water temple than this, and 2, my arguments are invalid because of annoying fan bases that are like, the water temple is the hardest thing ever, so everything with water is impossible. Yeah, shut up, we'll prove that point wrong in the next entry. Now for number 4, we go to the newest game in the series, Skyward Sword, with its abundance of dungeons. And will my pick be the Lanairu mining facility? The sand ship? Oh no. My favourite dungeon from Skyward Sword and my number 4 is the Ancient Cistern. How could this not make the list? This dungeon was the highlight of Skyward Sword for almost every gamer that played it. Be honest, guys. So you're a Zelda fan, you've just entered and you see water. You think, this dungeon's gonna suck. A few minutes later, you are completely proven wrong. Moving through the water has never felt so easy, and for once, not every single puzzle is based on the water. Now, this dungeon is important for two reasons on this list. One, this dungeon is both atmosphere and great design. I mean, there's the main room, golden and bathed in light, and beautiful clear water. And then there's the basement floor, the dark and purple eeriness of what is symbolically hell, with poison water, the boss key, zombie moblins, whatever you call them, bokoblins, I don't know. Yes, the bottom floor and the top floor are contrasts to each other though. The top floor represents heaven and the bottom floor represents hell, and that brings me to my second point in my criteria. This dungeon has a backstory. The ancient Cistern appears to be based on the short story The Spider's Thread. In it, the Lord Buddha is walking through paradise and gazes into a pond, past the lotus petals, veiling the water's surface, seeing the depths of hell. There in the darkness he sees a criminal, Kandata, who once intentionally avoids stepping on a spider. Moved to try reclaiming this man, the Buddha lowers a spider thread into hell and Kandata starts climbing to paradise. However, other sinners begin climbing as well, and Kandata, worried that the thread will not support the weight, exclaims that it is his and his alone. At this point, the thread breaks because Kandata was worried about only his own salvation and not his fellow sinners. Wow! Zelda dungeons just got a lot more serious. And then there was the whip, the item that you use in the puzzles in this dungeon, and more. But the real feature of this dungeon, as everybody knows, is the smartest boss in the Zelda franchise. Coloctus, the ancient automaton, a golden statue-like guardian made to protect the ancient flame of the temple, corrupted by the magic of Girahim, or should I say, Lady Girahim. Yeah, okay. Coloctus is smart because it protects its weak spot. What? Bosses can do that? Is that possible? Yes, it is. Coloctus protects its weak spots with its two bottom hands, and uses all his other attacks to uses all of his other arms and things to attack with his blades and swords and stuff, yeah. After a while, though, Coloctus gets up and tries to cut you to pieces, and then you use the whip, take its own weapons, and smash the monster to pieces. And this is the creepy part. This boss, when it is finally defeated, laughs like a little girl before blowing up into pieces. Does that mean Coloctus was a little damn girl this whole time? Anyways, I've done as much as I can to prove the Ancient Cistern is one of the best dungeons. However, in my opinion, only 3 others can really beat it. So then, let's go! Now, number 3 goes to one of the more darker themed dungeons. Now, if you want a place regarding death, many would think of the Shadow Temple from Ocarina of Time. But I'm not thinking about that dungeon. I would instead point out another dungeon from a less liked Zelda game. Yes, we are going with our second entry into the Twilight Princess game, which the theme is dark and mainly death. More importantly, the 4th dungeon, Arbiter's Grounds. The Arbiter's Grounds is a dungeon with a very morbid backstory. Warning guys, there is spoilers ahead! Click away now if you don't want to see spoilers! This place was used to execute the worst of the worst criminals, including Ganondorf, who murdered the Sage of Water and was banished into the Twilight Realm, and thus, as expected, the place is now inhabited by ghosts, Stalfos, and other dungeon undead monster things. Now, this is the end of the spoilers, so you can go back to looking at this thing normally now! The dungeon itself, at least from the outside, looks like a Roman Colosseum. However, entering the dungeon will show a more Egyptian tomb feel, especially with all the quicksand along the floor. Now, the actual dungeon is a horror-filled dungeon because you are constantly being followed by ghosts, forced to hunt down Pose to continue, but we'll get into that later. And those goddamn ghost rats, I hate them so much! But in reality, the worst ghost just so happens to be the mini-boss, Death Sword, a vengeful spirit that haunts the sword that it wielded in life, and can only be seen through Link's wolf form. It is a terror to behold, but defeating it grants you possibly the most fun item in the game. Yes, the spinner! And now all those notches in the wall become clear to you as you spin around over quicksand on your goddamn spinner, and suddenly the dungeon becomes that much more fun, and in my opinion, that's what sold this dungeon. Well, that and the Ancient Cistern Wait, what? What? What do you mean? What do you mean the Ancient Cistern sold this dungeon? Well, no, I didn't mean that, but you remember when I was mentioning the Ancient Cistern, and I said that what sold the dungeon was the boss? Well, yeah, it's the same here. The boss of Arbiter's Grounds was kind of the seal deal for me. Stallard was one of the best bosses in the game, in my opinion, and the battle uses the spinner to its utmost potential, smashing into the spine of the ancient skeleton, then having a high-speed chase with its head. But Arbiter's Ground, the actual dungeon, had a rather depressing and gloomy design, being an ex-prison, so it worked. There were a whole variety of broken-down columns, bones littering the floors, and the atmosphere was just intense. And I guess that's why it made my number 3. Well, that, and I just really like the game. So, we've gone to the past, and to the future, and now we are going to the game in the franchise that changed everything about Zelda. The first 3D Zelda game, Ocarina of Time. And what better representative than the first temple you experience as an adult? Yes! The Forest Temple! Billy Bo 10,000! How could you put this so low on the list? I mean, number 2 is just way too low for the Forest Temple. What the frick? Well, the decision between number 2 and number 1 was so close, as both did everything right. It was just a case of nitpicking to find the flaws of each individual dungeon. So the Forest Temple is your first adult temple and the most memorable dungeon in Ocarina of Time. The atmosphere is tense. This is your first true dungeon and you are nervous, you are curious, and you want to visit this place after seeing Saria here those 7 years before. And when you enter it, you feel afraid. And you want to know why you feel afraid? Well, when you were a child, the 3 dungeons that you went through, it just felt more like a game. It's like, hey, we're gonna go collect these really awesome jewels so we can stop this dude because it's a fun game. And then you're thrust into a world where Ganondorf rules the world, monsters roam the lands, people are dead, and then you have to enter the Forest Temple to actually save the world. You are actually doing what you were going to do as a child, which you didn't even expect. Now, back to the actual dungeon, the first thing you notice, the music. It is eerie, it is creepy, and it's something you wouldn't have been able to handle as Kid Link. It expresses your inner emotions about how you are apprehensive of the world around you, and you find it so eerie and confusing. The actual dungeon layout was rather confusing as well, but in a good way. The goal of the dungeon is to find 4 Poes that have taken power from the lift to the bottom floor. You are going through abandoned corridors of the temple, some of the rooms well furnished, others barren. The outdoor areas being a glimpse of the outside, some hope. Well, until all the monsters try and kill you. Not to mention the twisty corridors, they are enough to confuse you and enthrall you, and before you know it, you are hooked. You are so immersed in the game, and you are so in tune with the puzzles, you want to win. You find the bow and arrow, you shoot down the Poes, you battle your way past scary wall and floor masters until you defeat Meg and gain access to the bottom floor, you get to the boss room, and what are you faced with as your first adult boss? Phantom freaking Ganon, a weaker version of the most influential and intimidating character in the game. You feel like you can't win, and then using your new bow, you snipe the Phantom, and you play a game of Dead Man's Volley, only one coming out. And then lastly, you defeat Phantom Ganon and complete the temple, and you feel content. And your reward? You save your childhood sweetheart Saria, and you feel the satisfaction of completing one of the best temples in Zelda history. And that is that. That is the second place dungeon in all its glory. And now we are about to reach number 1. But let's have a quick recap. At number 10 we have the Sand Temple from Spirit Tracks. At number 9 we have the Ice Palace from A Link to the Past. At number 8 we had the Great Palace from Adventure of Link. At number 7 we had Snowpeak Ruins from Twilight Princess. At number 6 we had the Eagle's Tower from Link's Awakening. At number 5 we had the Great Bay Temple from Majora's Mask. At number 4 we had the Ancient Cistern from Skyward Sword. At number 3 we had the Arbiter's Grounds from Twilight Princess. And at number 2 we had the Forest Temple from Ocarina of Time. For our number 1, we have been to every part of Zelda history. The old, the new, the groundbreaking, and now we visit one game that we have been to before. My personal favourite and home of the greatest Zelda dungeon is in Majora's Mask. In the last 3 entries, we saw 3 different things I liked. A backstory, which Ancient Cistern and Arbiter's Grounds had. atmosphere, which the Forest Temple was in abundance of, and a great design, as an actual level design, which obviously every dungeon on this list had. But the winning dungeon does all of this, and adds a bit more to the top. The number 1 Zelda dungeon goes to the Stone Tower Temple from Majora's Mask. The Stone Tower Temple is without a doubt the best in terms of design, in terms of gimmick, in terms of item gained, in terms of soundtrack, in terms of backstory and relevance to the plot, but most importantly, it is one of the most moving dungeons on this list, and my favourite to play through. Okay, let's go through all that one at a time. In terms of design, the Stone Tower Temple is everything. It has water sections, lava sections, Deku Scrub sections, it has its own unique puzzles, it has the most variety out of any of the 4 temples in the game, and even the most variety out of the most of the temples in every other game. Due to its variety and 2 mini-bosses, it is by far the most varied when it comes to gameplay. You had to switch in and out of your inventory for every new room, as every new area came with new puzzles, a different mask to use, different gimmicks to follow. The gimmick and the item gained are also important, as you will soon see. Everything about this dungeon flowing into everything else. The item affects the gimmick, which affects the backstory, which affects the significance of the dungeon, which explains why it's in such a depth-related area in the first place, a kind of canyon. But back to the item you get. After defeating the Garrow Master, you gain the Light Arrows, which not only kill most enemies in a few hits, or even one hit, but killing certain enemies can get you large rupees and more in just a few hits, mainly the bubbles. The arrow also works with the temple's gimmick, flipping the temple upside down by shooting the light arrow at a temple outside. Sorry about that, guys. By shooting the light arrow at a statue outside of the temple. This flips the temple, and thus areas you could not reach now can be reached. This is yet to be matched in the franchise, and is one of the most unique yet simple gimmicks used in a Zelda game. But the gimmick also led to a lot of theories on the temple and its backstory. Similarly to the ancient Cistern, the temple contains religious backstory. The Stone Tower Temple was built so that the citizens of Termina could attempt to reach the goddesses, and so gain divine power. Now this was considered an insult to the goddesses, and it is the equivalent of sticking a middle finger up at them. So what do them goddesses do? To retaliate, they flip the tower that was aiming to build up to the heavens, and they make you go to the opposite place, Hell, which could be considered Twin Mold's Arena, a giant desert expanse with no life except the dungeon's boss filled with nothing but stone columns and death. So basically, it is about the Terminus people's lust for power, and the goddesses retaliate by flipping the temple, and since Link is the hero of the goddesses, it is only fitting that he should be the one to flip the tower over. And finally, we have the soundtrack. The soundtrack for the Stone Tower Temple is similar to that of the entire area, and contains one theme that is prominent: death. Now, in the world of Majora's Mask, everybody is living in fear, and by the time you reach this dungeon, Link's thoughts would be along the lines of, "What's the point? I just can't do this anymore." And then you hear the flute appear in the track, and the flute symbolizes hope, and the chance to succeed. And as you hear the flute, you are ready to finish what you started, and you go through the temple, and you do succeed. And thus, you have the perfect temple. One that has varied gameplay, that doesn't get old, a gimmick that just can't be copied. The ultimate weapon for the bow in the form of light arrows, 2 amazing mini-bosses against the Garrow Master, a swordsman rivaling Link, and Gomez, a creature of darkness itself. And the symbolism of the temple make for one perfect temple, or dungeon, with a truly memorable track. The Stone Tower Temple is my number 1 dungeon in the Legend of Zelda. So if any of you guys wish to express your opinions, feel free to comment down below, like the video and subscribe for more videos. I mainly do Minecraft gameplay, but I do a countdown every so often. Also, if you are going to comment down below, please don't flame, or your comment will be removed. Say it in a nice way and it'll stay. Anyways, I have been BillyBo10,000, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, guys.